As soon as the Cold War ended, armed conflicts in the world increased, to the point that, in 1993, the then Secretary-General of NATO, Manfred Wörner, stated, "Since the dissolution of Soviet communism, we are faced with a paradox. There is a retreat from the threat, but also a retreat from peace." From then on, war conflicts ceased to be part of the bipolar logic of the Cold War and began to have different motivations. Over time, there was a reduction in the number of wars, most of which occurred in poor countries in Africa and Asia. In this video, we'll see how most war conflicts are associated with poverty, social injustice, and lack of economic opportunities. According to the Dictionary of Politics by Norberto Bobbio, terrorism is the political practice of those who systematically resort to violence against people or things, provoking terror. When an organization commits a terrorist attack, whether by installing a bomb in a public place or using a suicide bomber, it is trying to intimidate, to spread fear in a community or a country to achieve some end. Diffusion of an ideology, autonomy, political, territorial, ethnic, or religious self-affirmation, among others. It is also essential to distinguish guerrilla warfare from terrorism, although many times a guerrilla group may use terrorist tactics. The guerrilla is characterized by a conflict that opposes irregular formations of combatants on the one hand and regular armed forces of a state on the other. It is typical of countries that present very accentuated political and socioeconomic injustices, so that part of their population is willing to fight for change or support a group that proposes to do so. According to the Dictionary of Politics, the destruction of existing institutions and the social and political emancipation of the populations are, in fact, the main objectives of the groups that resort to this type of armed struggle. In general, guerrilla groups attack military targets and state strategies. They are concerned with minimizing civilian casualties and winning the sympathy and support of part of the population. Terrorists, in their aim to cause panic, are indifferent to the number of civilian victims and are not interested in talking to the population or obtaining their support. There are several historical examples of guerrilla groups in different countries, mainly in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, continents marked by poverty, social injustice, and concentration of political power. In Latin America, in 2015, the oldest active armed group was the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, which has been fighting the Colombian state since its creation in 1964. In the beginning, the FARC was a rural guerrilla inspired by the Cuban Revolution that fought against social injustices and therefore obtained support from part of the population, especially the poorest. Over time, however, the FARC came to be considered a terrorist group due to its violent methods encompassing kidnappings of civilians and even involvement in drug trafficking, which became its main source of income. Therefore, they no longer have the support of the Colombian population. In Africa, in several countries, guerrilla groups fought against colonialism, such as the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola and the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, which fought against Portuguese domination. After political independence was obtained in 1975, however, the armed conflict in Angola was inserted into the logic of the Cold War. The Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola was consolidated in power with the support of the Soviet Union, and the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, supported by the United States and South Africa, began to fight against the government. The civil war in Angola lasted until 2002, when a peace agreement was signed. The National Union for the Total Independence of Angola ceased to be a guerrilla group and became an opposition party to the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola. There are guerrilla groups that adopt terrorist tactics against a national state, trying to separate part of the territory or expel occupation troops. Examples are the Chechen groups in Russia and the Kurds in Turkey. There are also groups that use religious fundamentalism as a justification for spreading terror. This is the case of Al-Qaeda, which fights against the hegemony of Western Christian society, represented mainly by the United States, in the name of preserving certain precepts of Islam. This is also the case with the Islamic State, which controls parts of the territories of Syria and Iraq. Terrorism can also be practiced by the state, as in South Africa, while apartheid was enforced. After political independence in 1961, the National Party came to power controlled by descendants of Dutch and German immigrants. From then on, the white minority made apartheid official. This minority, less than 10% of the population, controlled the state apparatus, companies, and land and exploited the black majority who lived confined in ghettos, coerced by violence and without the possibility of exercising minimal political rights. During apartheid, people were white or black. There was no in-between. This dichotomy, however, lost some of its force with the end of this segregationist regime. State terrorism was also common in Latin America during the various military dictatorships that were installed in the Cold War period. During this period, thousands of people were imprisoned without trial, tortured, and many of them were murdered simply because they opposed the current government. In reaction to political closure and the absence of dialogue, armed groups emerged that began to adopt terrorist practices against dictatorial governments, intensifying conflict and violence.